Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on May 10th, 2011, Josh Young murdered Trey Zucker in one of the most brutal crimes imaginable. He beat him to death as Trey suffocated on the mud that his face was pounded into, while the baseball bat hit the back of his head. In the creek by Liberty High School, right behind the house where he lived with his mother and his sister. Did the defendant do this alone? Did he do it with Josh Gowker? Did he hit the back of Trey's head with the baseball bat while Gowker used a metal pipe? Did Young use a baseball bat and a metal pipe? Before we get to what happened, I want to go over the jury instructions so you know what I have to prove. You have to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that in Jefferson County, Kentucky, on May 10th or 11th, 2011, acting alone or in complicity with another, Josh Young murdered Trey Zucker, and that he did so intentionally. May 10th or 11th, Jefferson County, everybody testified to those two elements. Acting alone or in complicity with another. That other is obviously Gowker. But what does complicity mean? A person is guilty of an offense committed by another person when, with the intention that the crime happens, he, among other things, aids or attempts to aid such person in planning or committing the offense. That means that if you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant helped his dad plan or commit this offense, and that when he was doing so, it was his intention that the murder occurred. Instruction in your copy of the jury instruction. It's the proper definition of complicity. And so turn to that page and you can see, sorry my slide, there was an error. With the intention of promoting or facilitating the commission of the offense, he solicits, commands, or engages in a conspiracy to commit the offense or aids, counsels, or attempts to aid such person in planning or committing the offense. That means that if you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant helped Gowker plan or commit this offense, and that when he was doing so, it was his intention that the murder occur, then he is as guilty as his dad. That is the law in Kentucky. And you will notice that under the murder instruction, it says alone or in complicity with another. To find him guilty of murder, you have to believe that he was acting alone, or you have to believe that he was acting in complicity with Gowker. Either scenario results in a murder conviction. Some of you can believe he was acting alone, and some of you can believe he was acting with Gowker. But as long as all 12 of you believe that he committed this murder under either scenario, you are unanimous. And that makes sense. It would be ridiculous if some of you believed that he committed the murder standing by himself and some of you believed he committed the murder standing by Gowker, but you couldn't agree as to the scenario that he would then walk. As long as all of you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed the murder one way or the other, alone or in complicity, you are unanimous as to guilt on murder. The other, next slide, please, thank you. The other charge is tampering with physical evidence. And you have to believe, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant, on or about May 11th, concealed clothing and or a murder weapon, which he believed was about to be produced or used in a criminal proceeding, and that he did so with the intent to impair its availability. And the second part of that makes sense. Obviously, if somebody is throwing away clothes and a murder weapon immediately after a murder, They are doing so to keep it from the police. And obviously, we would have wanted to have used those items in the prosecution. So then we back up to the only question here, which is, did Josh Young do this? And before I get to applying the facts of the case to the elements, which is where I would normally go here, I first have to step back and discuss Gowker and his plea. Because the unusual nature of this case leaves us with somebody who has pled guilty and said that he did this all by himself. And if you believe that, then obviously you can go home right now. But what Gowker said in his plea in this courtroom was a bunch of lies, and this is why. He testified that after the cookout, he and Amanda went back and forth between her house and Cassie's, that they ended up fighting in the front yard in front of Cassie's. He gave her the bruises on her neck. They made up, had sex, needed cigarettes, went to the store, came home, had more sex, made a video, and that then he woke up and played video games on the couch with Trey. Apparently they said on Mackenzie. He said they played video games on the couch. He noticed that his food was gone. He saw Trey with his lighter. He got angry about the food and the lighter, and he went down to the creek, took Trey down to the creek, said they would smoke pot together. He wanted to scare him, and he ended up killing him. And that then he disposed of his clothes in a dumpster behind a Mexican restaurant. Although he told you in court that it was on the way to McNeely Lake. And that is a lie. First of all, let's start with the lighter. This is the lighter found in Trey's pocket. It is a gas station Bic lighter. It is not a lighter that even Josh Gowker would kill somebody over. Mackenzie slept on the couch. Gowker testified that she wasn't on the couch. Mackenzie testified that she was on the couch and that she never saw Gowker. And here are her sheets on the couch to prove it. Trey had no new marijuana in his system. You heard from Dr. Burroughs-Beckham that it was in his urine, not in his blood. He had smoked in the past, but not in the past approximately 3 days, and certainly not that night. So Gowker's story that he and Trey were down there and that they'd been smoking and that they fell into conversation about Trey's dad is a lie. Nothing in Gowker's demeanor in court or anything else you've heard in this case gives any credence to the idea that in the middle of a school night, Trey would leave the house and go down to the creek to hang out with his mother's abusive husband. Also, I think it's well established that Trey was dead by the time that Gowker says this happened. Jeremy left when it was starting to get dark. They were about to eat when Jeremy left. Cassie left after dinner around 9. Amanda sent Mackenzie in to bathe around 9. So I think we can say they were having dinner probably around 8:30ish, but before 9. Dr. Burroughs-Beckham said he was killed 1 to 3 hours after eating, 4 on the very outside. Now he and Mackenzie were showering, his mom was cleaning up. It's unlikely he got killed on the 1 hour side of this. He was still around the house at 9:30. So we look at the far end. He was killed between 10:30 and 12:30. And we know that Gowker and Amanda were at the Circle K between 1:06 and 1:09. We also know that Gowker was wearing the same clothes the next day. There he is in the store. There he is the next day at the scene. Same clothes, 34 U of L jersey. Doesn't look like it's in the dumpster of a Mexican restaurant. You also know, because Gowker has told so many lies, he can't keep his story straight. Let's review his testimony at the trial as it relates to what happened in the murder.
The details of the murder are important to you.
Some shit I wasn't able to see it, but I can see vividly. Like I remember remember it, a lot of, that shit that it doesn't sound like I remember.
What was the details you remember?
I just remember just a lot of shit, just,
Like what?
it's sadistic, man. You want to hear that shit?
Tell us what you remember. If you did this, it shouldn't be so hard.
It's not hard.
Tell us what you remember.
Just being covered. Troy. That's it.
That's what you remember.
Yeah.
See what happens when he has to testify about the details of the murder? He can't remember what he told the court the last time. He can't keep his story straight. And up till that point, Miss White had been leading him. Her questions had been, you told the court, didn't you? You told Detective Russ, didn't you? This was the first time she just let him ramble on, and he couldn't fill in the blanks. And did you notice that he accidentally said we? There was just some shit that we, and then he cut himself off. So this play is a lie. What does that do for this case? Gowker didn't do it by himself. So now we figure out who did. Just want to point out again that he accidentally said we when discussing the murder. Who committed it? Here's a timeline, because we've needed to fall back on those over and over in this case. Late 1980s, Gowker comes to Bim Drive, hangs out with Terry and his friends. Eventually Terry doesn't like him anymore. In 1996, Amanda and Terry are together and Trey is born. Sometime after that, they split. Amanda dates Gowker. Gowker already has a son, Josh Young, by Angie Young. Amanda and Terry are in a custody dispute. Amanda marries Gowker. They, along with Trey and Josh Young, are living with Gowker's mother. There's the balcony incident, and ultimately in 2002, Gowker goes to prison. Amanda has Mackenzie in the meantime, and then in the fall of 2010, Gowker gets out of prison. He contacts Amanda almost immediately. He contacts Angelique. He gets back together with Amanda. They're still technically married. Christmas Eve, Josh Young is at Amanda's house. We know there was a fight between Amanda and Gowker because she heard a call on Trey's phone. He had Trey's phone and she pocket dialed it and she heard him insulting her to Cassie. They get in a huge fight. She gets an abortion. Gowker finds out and they continue fighting. February, they're on and off. March, they're on and off. And during this whole period, Gowker is trying to establish custody of the defendant. During this period, Gowker is mad about the abortion. April, they're on and off. Sometime in April, there's the incident with Amanda and Mackenzie in the car, Gowker banging on the top of the car, and then Amanda running through the neighborhood with Mackenzie. May 8th, Mother's Day. Terry took Trey to work at McDonald's. Amanda took him home. There was a cookout at Cassie's. Amanda and Gowker are speaking again at this point, after a break of several weeks. The next day, Amanda quits McDonald's. And I do not disagree with anything Ms. Smith said about the domestic violence and the situation Amanda was in. She quits McDonald's. She and Gowker are down smoking at the creek. The next night, Amanda has a cookout. Who's there? Cassie, John, their kids, the defendant, Amanda, Gowker, Trey, Mackenzie, Jeremy, neighborhood kids. And the fact that John can't remember which neighborhood kids has nothing to do with John's credibility. They were friends of Trey and Josh Young. There was no testimony that they were friends with John's kids. John had been in the neighborhood since April. They play basketball. They find a turtle. I do not think that Josh Gowker had the power to put a turtle at the creek and cause the kids to call him and John to come down to find the turtle. The turtle is just a part of this timeline. 7:30 or 8, John leaves, starts watching a movie. Jeremy leaves as it's getting dark. Everyone else eats. 9:30ish, Cassie leaves. They all start watching a the movie with John, Amanda's cleaning. She unscrews the lights. Mackenzie bathes, Trey showers, Gallagher's back and forth between Amanda's and Cassie's while Amanda's cleaning. Cassie takes her medicine at 9:30. 10:30, John goes to bed. Around 10:30, Jeremy calls Amanda. Here's a male in the background, so we can assume that Amanda is with Gallagher at that point. Trey comes outside, sees his mom, and goes back in. At some point, Gallagher is at Cassie's, taking too long. He's down there getting his clothes, his toothbrush, whatever. They get in a fight, and Amanda ends up with those bruises that she calls hickeys. Presumably, Cassie and John are already asleep by this point. And sometime during this portion of the timeline, Mackenzie sees Trey leave. We have the bedroom, Circle K, bedroom portion of the night. Amanda says she watches TV for a while after Gallagher falls asleep. She hears him snoring. At that point, doesn't know if he snores the rest of the night. It doesn't matter. Gallagher says that Amanda falls asleep and then he goes out to the couch to play video games. We've already established that's a lie. It has been far more than 4 hours since dinner at this point. Trey is already dead. Cassie is woken by Josh Young. She's woken by Josh Young again. She's woken again with Gallagher. That's when she gets up. Because yes, she is in a relationship of some sort with Gallagher at that point. When Young is waking her up and saying, I killed Trey, you need to help me, she's saying, I'm sleeping, go away. But when it's Josh Gallagher who wakes her up, she gets up. Cassie drives Young to the dumpster. Josh Young throws away the clothes in the back. The next morning, Gallagher gets up early, puts Mackenzie on the bus. Maybe he goes down to Cassie's and puts her kids on the bus. Tells John Robertson that Josh Young killed Trey. Takes Amanda to McNeely Lake and tells her realtor that they have 2, not 3, kids. Amanda finds Trey's backpack and the frantic search for Trey begins. The police come. Detective Russ interviews Terry, the father of the victim. They've established at this point that Trey is down there. While he's interviewing Terry, Detective Maroney is interviewing Amanda and Gallagher. Gallagher starts asking Russ after that if he can see the body. Maroney interviews Young. She interviews him about the last time he saw Trey. He says he took a shower. He changed back into real clothes. He says, I was in my room and he was in the shower. And she confirms, you know he changed back into his regular clothes because you saw him after he got out of the shower? And he says, yes. This is interesting because everybody else remembers that the defendant left the cookout with Cassie as Mackenzie was going into her bath, which she took before Trey's shower. So the defendant could not possibly have seen Trey come out of the shower. How does he know that he changed back into real clothes? Because he saw him in real clothes when they snuck out together later that night. Continuing our timeline, the police investigation begins, and I'm not going to go through all of that because you've heard it through several detectives, but it was extensive and it went in all directions. The Bridgewood kids came up in the investigation, so Detective Russ investigated the Bridgewood kids. He brought them in for interviews. He confirmed their alibis. He went out at 1 in the morning to interview a foster mother so that he could confirm an alibi. He was pulling surveillance tapes. He was looking at phone records. He investigated the Bridgewood kids and eliminated them as suspects. To say that he had tunnel vision is ridiculous. He was willing to go down every fork in the road, every suspect that came up, and to rule out people that he initially thought were suspects when the evidence dictated. They were collecting things at the scene that ended up having no relevance to this case. They collected sweatpants that were up by Liberty High School because those might have something to do with it, even though it turns out they did not. They collected a sword, they collected a knife, they collected anything they thought might help this investigation. Now I know the defense has made a point through their questioning that they did not collect every blunt object in the house. That is impossible. You cannot collect every blunt object in the house. Detective Russ told you why he eliminated those things from collection. The white pipes were hollow. The things in the garage were in the back had cobwebs. Murderers usually don't bring their murder weapons back to the house. They have to have a reason to think that something is connected to this before they're going to collect it and test it, and they collected everything they thought in their experience might have a connection with this case. They didn't collect the banana. They were investigating a murder. They didn't collect the cigarette wrappers from the trash. Well, of course, Gowker's and Amanda's DNA might be on them, and I do not think that Josh Gowker artistically placed items in a trash can. Those were the cigarette packs they were smoking. They threw them away in the trash can. So at the same time that Detective Ross is investigating the Bridgewood kids, he's also continuing the Vim Drive portion of the investigation. May 14th, he interviewed John. John was a nervous wreck because he knows that the Joshes are involved and he can't handle the stress of lying. Detective Russ interviews Gowker, Jeremy McFarland, May 19th. He interviews Amanda, May 29th. Through June 6th is the portion of the time when Amanda finally leaves because Gowker has become increasingly more controlling to a crazy degree. And this is when she takes out the EPO on Gowker. On June 10th, Detective Russ interviews Young. And in this interview, Young said that Trey said he was going in to take a shower, so Young came down to Cassie's and ended up falling asleep. He said he was going to take a shower. The cookout was ending. He went in to take a shower. Now, were you in the house when he took the shower? Because I came over here. In total contradiction to what he had said right after the murder to Detective Monroe. He mentions in this interview that he knows that Amanda and his dad were together the whole night and that they went to the gas station. Because Young and Gowker have been talking about this. They've been planning this. He mentions that his relationship with his dad is tight. June 18th to 21st, Gowker and Young flee south. They go south. They take Angelique and Jahara with them. The car breaks down. Young tells Angelique and Jahara that he killed Trey. On June 21st, the defendant was brought back. Detective Russ interviewed again. He played the two portions, the conflicting portions, from June 10th and June 21st. May 11th and June 10th. Now we're on June 21st. He plays those conflicting portions. And Young maintains that he was down at Cassie's. And then he says, I love my dad more than anything in this world, and I'd rather be with him than anybody in this world. My life is much better with my dad. Being with my dad is all worth it. Being with my dad is better than being anywhere else. This is after Young is brought back from Alabama. Miss Smith told you that he was scared for his life in Alabama when he was staring into Aaron Speck's eyes, scared for his life. This is how he felt about his dad. Not scared for his life, rather be with his dad than anyone else, anywhere else. He also said in this interview, my dad was with Amanda. She stated that the whole night. Why would she try to, is she trying to change it now? Gowker and Young need Amanda to establish their alibi. On June 22nd, the day after this interview, Detective Russ and Detective Stalby drive to Alabama, interview Gowker, make the phone calls that you heard. They go straight to Cassie's when they return home the next day to confirm that she doesn't change her story once Gowker's not there in the conversation. They arrest Young. He says, I'm sticking with my story. This is a 15-year-old who yawns when he is being arrested for murder. Detective Walker and McKinley go to Cassie's. She drives them on the route to the dumpster. The next day, Detective Russ interviews Angelique and Jahar. By fall, Gowker is in prison in Kentucky. You heard from Paul Embry. Gowker is in prison in Kentucky, and he tells Embry that the plan was to lure Trey down there, but then Gowker would do it. That they were both present for the murder, that it went too far, that Young got his swing from his old man. You heard from Jason Beer. Gowker told him that Young gave the clothes to a kissing cousin. Told him about the older lady in Alabama, about accidentally getting released, that he talked his son into killing Trey, but he didn't have to do much persuading because he was a DNC. And then he told him his plans for this case.
It come out on the news, and it's on the news where he was telling on his son, and he said that he was going to man up and take the blame for it because he had an alibi. That he was going to try and get his son off, and then later fight his case back in court and just get hit with the perjury because he had an alibi.
So why didn't Gowker initially back in Alabama stick with the plan to take the blame? It's because he's a self-serving coward. He's arrested, he wants out. And he probably thought it wouldn't be so bad for Young. He probably didn't know it would go this far. Why did he ultimately take the blame? I don't, for a second, believe that it was out of any sort of parental duty. It's because when he was initially talking to these inmates back in 2012, he hadn't decided to take the blame. He was just boasting and trying to establish a reputation in prison. He's just there on a parole violation. He wants to be respected as a murderer. But it makes no sense that he had already established some sort of lie. His initial story is that Josh Young did it all. His story now is that he did it all and Josh Young did nothing. There is no strategic reason to come up with this middle evidence that he and Josh Young together were down there. After this, he realized what was going to happen to him. Prison inmates were willing to come forward and talk to us with no deals. They were so appalled by him that they just told us what happened. And sometimes to their detriment, as you heard. And you saw from Mr. Kristanak, who was willing to take a contempt charge, the fear that inmates have about snitching. That is what other men in prison thought of Gowker. So he realized he had to do something to survive prison. He decided to take the blame for this. I assume he thinks that makes him some sort of a prison hero. The defense thinks that Gowker is a lot smarter than we think he is. They give him a lot more credit for being able to plan this out than I think he deserves. He wasn't smart enough to concoct a plan that lasted past the first interview. Stories were already starting to crack when Josh Young went in there and inadvertently admitted to knowing what Trey was wearing. So back to the elements. How do you know that we have proven that he is guilty of murder and tampering? Well, Cassie is an eyewitness to Josh Young tampering. The defense says that she's under Gowker's control. As for many of the witnesses, this case relies largely on witness testimony, and many of these witnesses were telling partial truths. And your job of the jury, as you know, is to sift through, to know what their motivations were, when their motivations were, and figure out which part of the testimony is the truth. That is your job as witnesses. So Cassie, yes, was under Gowker's influence back then. I think she was sleeping with him. I think that she seriously liked him. And that she would do what he said, and that is why when Detective Ross called her from Alabama and said, "Who killed Trey?" and Gowker's on that phone, she says, "You did, right?" Because that's what Gowker told her to say. And you saw Cassie. She is not sophisticated. She could not even figure out, now that Gowker is changing the rules, changing the story, she couldn't keep up with his change in story. She had trouble with the lie that he told her to do. She's asking him a question because she was a bad liar. When Detective Russ asked her who woke her up that night, she said little Josh. And she said little Josh asked her to help him get rid of the clothes. How else do we know that Cassie's telling the truth? In the phone call that Detective Russ made from Alabama, when Gowker is trying to get Cassie to talk, he says, "You're not going to get in trouble for helping with that other ship." And she knows what he's talking about. He's reassuring her that she's not getting in trouble for taking Josh Young to the dumpster. And she knows what he's talking about. The statement presupposes that there has been some tampering. How else do we know this phone call?
For what?
Well, you should let me know if there's an envelope there.
It doesn't matter, you're not going to be charged with nothing.
Are you for sure?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm just, I don't know that. You know, I don't really do anything like this before. Really.
Fine.
Huh?
What's up, though? You're all right. You promised me that you would.
I wasn't showing what I told little Josh yesterday, and we come by with the big ass CSI van and took some pictures of the van.
I showed them where I took little Josh. I was the adult there. She's frustrated and worried about getting arrested. She's not faking a story for a jail phone call. How else do we know? Because Gowker messed up when he was testifying.
Yeah. You remember talking about Cassie? You remember saying that Josh told you that he woke Cassie up after he killed Trey?
Yeah, I'm the one that ended up getting her up. Yeah. But
And
yeah.
you ended up waking her up?
Yeah.
Okay. You remember telling them that...
I didn't tell him that.
I'm the one who ended up getting her up. I didn't tell him that. He admits that he ended up getting Cassie up. Who was initially getting Cassie up? Josh Young. They were there. This tampering occurred. And for Cassie and for all of these witnesses, you have to ask yourself, if they were lying for Gowker and under his control, then why didn't they change their stories when he wanted the story changed? When he comes in here and pleads guilty and said he did it, if these witnesses are still under his control today, why aren't they following the party line? May we approach?
Yes, come on.
The only part of anyone's statement that changed was when Cassie brought Gowker into the tampering. She initially told Detective Russ that Josh Young woke her up. On April 4th, 2013, she tells Detective Russ that Josh Young was there one of the times. Why did that change? I'll tell you why. Back in 2011, she liked Gowker. She wanted to minimize his involvement. It was a minor part of the story to her because Young was the one who had gone to the dumpster with her. Now, 2013, he's been in prison for 2 years. Affections have changed. She now tells his role in it. It's not because she's under his control. You can tell she's not under his control because she's not telling the court what he wants the court to think. You heard from John. You heard Detective Russ tell you how on May 15th, when he was trying to talk to John in front of his house, John was sweating and shaking because he knew what had happened, and he knew he was lying to the police, and he was freaking out. John Robertson is not someone who would be able to amble into a courtroom and commit perjury without breaking a sweat. Why did he lie to police initially? Because the people living in his house told them they were part of a murder. I suppose the defense wants you to believe that on May 15th, John was nervous and sweating for some other reason. That then Josh Gowker said, I'm going to head to Alabama. If I get arrested and the police call you, here's the story that you're supposed to tell. And then 2 years later, after John finds out that Josh Gowker, living under his roof, was sleeping with Cassie, he's still going to say, okay, buddy, I'll maintain the story that you told me to tell 2 years ago. Cassie knows the plan is supposed to be to tell people that Gowker did it. That's what he told them. Tell them I did it. I'll take the blame initially. But you heard John's call. John never says you, right? He tells Detective Russ in that phone call that Gowker told him the next day the little Josh killed Trey. And that Cassie told him she went somewhere and dropped off a bag of clothes in a bag. And that a couple days later, little Josh said that he hid Trey with John's old bat from when he was a kid. And that is what he told you. Remember how Gowker couldn't keep his story straight, couldn't remember what he told in the past? It's hard to remember a lie, but it's easy to remember the truth.
What did Josh Young tell you about the murder?
He told me that him and Trey went down to the ditch to smoke some weed. He asked him what time it was, and then he hit him with the bat.
If Cassie and John are assistant criminal masterminds who are fabricating testimony, they would have done a better job before they got in here of figuring out that testimony about where they slept. That testimony was a mess because that's how Cassie and John are, and that is the truth. Cassie could not remember where people slept. John remembered where people slept. You heard all that. You saw Cassie and John just being Cassie and John. All right, Jahara. Down in Alabama, Josh Young tells her, well, Josh Gowker, I think, probably brought up the story, but she says, you killed Trey, and Josh Young says, yeah, laughed about it. I beat him to death. Now, there is a discrepancy between Jahara's version of the kidnapping and Aaron's version of the kidnapping, and that has nothing to do with what you have to consider in this case. There is no evidence that Aaron was present at night in the hotel room when Jahara heard this from Josh Young. Aaron was with them for 6 hours. Now, Jahara testified that she was scared of Gowker. Aaron testified that she couldn't tell Jahara was scared of Gowker. Aaron testified that she was pretending not to be scared of Gowker to get herself out of that situation. People act how they have to act when they are being threatened. And I don't know that Jahara was scared of Gowker the entire time she was down there. These women seem to have a strange attraction to him, so she probably stayed past the time that Angelique left because this was a fun road trip for her. I don't know. It's not relevant. What's relevant is that she heard Josh Young admit to killing Trey. Angelique, same thing, in a hotel room. Young said he killed Trey, used a slugger. Now, Angelique dated Gowker when she was a teenager. He pops back up in her life. He probably put on a good show, convinced her to drive him. down south, and if it's a Sunday and you don't have to work till Wednesday, that's not an unreasonable road trip to take. But then things dragged on, and she had to get to work, and she heard things that scared her, so her grandparents bought her a ticket. Young told Angelique that he killed Trey with a slugger. And not only do you have Gowker's word for it, or Angelique's word for it, but you have Gowker, again, slipping up on the stand.
Are you denying that you told them that little Josh told Angelique that he did it?
I told them that little Josh told Angel. I don't know if he told her. I don't remember.
Gowker sat up here and lied and lied and lied, but every now and then he got a little frustrated under the questioning, and that's when he would slip up and you would hear the nuggets of truth. He doesn't remember if he told her or if I told her. One of them told Angelique. Now, obviously, this part of the puzzle that is Angelique and Jahara just proves that Josh Young told them he killed Trey. He told them that he did. It's just one piece of the puzzle. A month later, he's bragging about it. Doesn't mean he committed it. We have to look at the entire puzzle, put it together. We have Cassie. While Trey is still probably suffocating on the mud, Josh Young is telling Cassie that he did it. He's telling John the next day. There's the timeline of events. It's not just that he told Jahara and Angelique in a hotel room. It's everything together. You put it all together and you get the true story. And you have an eyewitness to the tampering because you have Cassie, but you almost have an eyewitness to the murder. You have a slim eyewitness to the murder because you hear Gowker on the stand messing up, talking about the murder scene and saying, "we." I want to briefly touch on the medical testimony. You all, I'm sure, pay close attention, so I'm not going to spend a long time on it. But you heard from Nichols that there was nothing, Dr. Nichols, that there was nothing to prevent more than one person from walking around the body. Obviously, you see the pictures of where the body was. That the facial injuries could be caused by sharp injury, but they could be caused by forcing the head into the rocks. That he was hit in the head more than once, in his opinion. That his back was hit with a rod-like structure applied in the same direction. Person in the same foot place. That he could not say that only one person was down there. In fact, he said it could have been a whole party. That there is no way to tell how many blows to the head occurred. That there is no way to tell from what direction the head blows came. That he can't say that a bat didn't hit him in the back of the head. You also heard from Dr. Burroughs-Beckham. Repetitive blows to the same spot in the back of the head can cause a sharp force injury, what appears to be a sharp force injury to actually be a blunt force injury, because the tissue bridges that normally denote a blunt force injury end up breaking when the spot is hit over and over. She said the skin tag on the back of his head indicates at least 2 blows, that his face was probably punched, plus beaten into the ground, that the head injury could be a metal pipe, could be a baseball bat. She said she can't rule out bat. She said more than four blows, and that she can't say how many people. So what does the evidence show occurred on May 10th, 2011? This is what we know. We know there was a cookout. That Trey ate at dusk, that Mackenzie slept on the couch, that Trey snuck out. We know that this occurred long before Gowker and Amanda went to the Circle K. We know that Young was watching a movie 2 doors down at Cassie and John's. We know that the houses are close and that Cassie's is open to the ditch. We know that John Robertson's bat ended up missing. We know that Young had been noticing when the neighborhood lights went on and off. We know that Jeremy called Amanda at 10:30 and heard a male in the background. We know that the light got unscrewed because Detective Ross found it that way the next day. We know that Gowker went to Cassie's to get some things to spend the night. that Amanda and Gowker got in a fight that left bruises on her neck. We know that Trey was murdered. We know that it could have been one person and it could have been more. We know that it could have been a rod, and it could have been a rod and a bat. We know that after Trey was murdered, Young and then Gowker woke up Cassie and enlisted her in getting rid of a bag and a bat. And that Gowker went to the Circle K at 1:06. We know that Gowker knew that Trey was dead the next day. We know that Young knew what Trey was wearing after he wasn't supposed to have seen him. We know that Young told Angelique he did it, that he told Jahar he did it, that he told Cassie he did it, that he told John he did it. We know that Gowker must have a trial and said we. Sometimes I think this case gets framed as, did Josh Young help Gowker commit this murder? The question is actually, did Gowker help Young commit the murder? But that is not the question for you, because you are not Gowker's jury. There's no doubt that Gowker started this murder. An eye for an eye, you kill my kid, I kill yours. The seeds of this murder may have been planted 15 years before, when Amanda, instead of waiting for him to come back from Michigan, dated Terry Zwicker, a man he hated, and got pregnant. But it's hard to get Gowker there at the scene when you look at the timeline. Now let me be clear, I don't think for a second that Gowker isn't guilty of this. I think he started it, I think he put his son up to it. Look at the complicity definition and there you go, he's guilty. But this is the reasonable inference filling in the blanks from what we know. And that is that Trey and Josh Young snuck out together. They lived 2 doors apart. There's conflicting testimony on how, whether they were friends or not. But you know that they played video games together. You know that they had the same group of friends. They're at the same cookout. Hey, let's go to the creek later. Trey gets busted the first time. We know that. So he waits until Amanda and Josh either go to Cassie's or go to the bedroom, and then he sneaks out again and Mackenzie sees him. She said he was getting out of there quickly. It's because he's running late. We know that John's bat was missing. They took that bat. Why did Trey think they were taking a bat down? I don't know. Maybe it was protection from the Bridgewood kids. Maybe just because it was dark. They probably do go down there to smoke pot. But before they can do that, as Young told John, he asked Trey what time it was. Trey pulled out his phone. What does a phone do? It lights up. He pulled out his phone, looked at the time. His eyes are blinded. And while his eyes are distracted by the light, he gets hit. Why does Young do this? Because of his father. Because he is finally back with his father. And he is desperate to impress him. And his father has put him up for this, and his father has just chastised him earlier that night for showing mercy. Being with my dad is better than being anywhere else. Was Gowker there? I don't know. Look at the distance. Somebody's got to get all the way from there down to the creek. Could he do that without Amanda noticing? I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe that's why she was marching down to Cassie's angry. But this isn't his trial. That's not something we have to prove. The medical examiner said it could have been one person, could have been more. Now, we do know that he was back and forth to Cassie's, and that Cassie and John went to bed fairly early after the cookout. So it's a fair inference that he was going to Cassie's that late to talk to his son. We know that in the middle of the night, 1:06, Gowker goes to Circle K. Why does he feel the need to put himself on camera? Is it really because they're out of cigarettes? Or is it because he knows what went on at the creek? And he has to rush out and establish an alibi. This is not Gowker's trial, and I don't have to prove if Gowker was down at the creek. It's an interesting question. We know that Young and Gowker woke up Cassie together, so we know he was involved to some extent, that they were both doing this together. You may remember that in his trial, when he was discussing getting custody of Josh Young, when he was discussing how he had plotted murdering someone while he was in prison, he said he couldn't do it right away because he had to jump through the CPS hoops. What did he mean by that? He could have killed Amanda or one of her children anytime he wanted. What would the CPS process give him that would assist him in this murder? Josh Young. Now, I'm not unaware of the challenges you face. It's a big challenge. He is a juvenile. You may be wondering if a child that young could swing a bat with enough force to kill someone. I remind you that younger boys than that can hit home runs. I also remind you that he was not sitting calmly in a courtroom wearing a sweater vest on May 10th. You may be wondering if he should be held accountable for something that his father convinced him to do. And as we have shown, he was doing this to impress his father. And I remind you, as we said in voir dire, a court has already determined that this is the appropriate place for this case to be heard. And it is not
Precedence on that.
Come on.
It is not your responsibility to worry about he is too young to be held accountable. The law decided that. Your responsibility is to determine whether we met the elements. That is the only question for you. You may be wondering if he was unduly pressured into this by his father. After all, he was young. He was in his father's care. But we as a society value life so much that you cannot kill someone and then say someone else made him do it and then get away with it. He had the free will to say no. No, Dad, I'm not going to do that. And afterwards, he could have said, Cassie, oh my God, you've got to take me to the police right away. But he didn't. He talked to police repeatedly without his father present, even after his dad was in custody in Alabama. He was not coerced into doing this. He bragged about it. He laughed about it. But if you are worried about whether his father's influence should affect your verdict, that is not one of the elements. You cannot look over at him and feel sorry for him because he looks young and then say not guilty for that reason. You cannot look over there and feel sorry because he had a bad dad and then say not guilty for that reason. You cannot say, I think he did it, but because he had a bad life, because he had a bad dad and was desperate to impress him, I'm going to subconsciously add reasonable doubt. You cannot let sympathy add reasonable doubt. You look at the facts, you apply them to the elements. The only question for you is whether we have met these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. I told you in voir dire I can't answer all the questions you have about this case. When people murder someone off camera, as they usually do, there will always be questions. But that doesn't mean that the murder wasn't committed. I asked you if I prove all the elements, even if you have questions about X or about 100 X's. What is your verdict if I prove all the elements? And you said guilty. If you know he has committed this murder, it is because we have proven it to you. You came in here knowing nothing about this case. Now you know more than you ever wanted to know. And if you know that the defendant committed the murder, it is because we have proven it to you beyond a reasonable doubt. You heard it from Cassie, you heard it from John, you heard it from Angelique, you heard it from Jahara, you heard it in the inferences from his father, and Paul Embry and Jason Bierman. Trey Zwicker was brutally murdered at age 14 when he was finishing his freshman year in high school. Because Josh Gauker is a control freak and because Josh Young wanted to impress him. Trey will never finish high school, never get to grow up alongside his dad, never get to take care of his sister, never get to find a girlfriend.
Yes, come on. This
utterly senseless and heartbreaking. participants is being held accountable for it now, for the rest of his life. Now it's the defendant's turn. It is your job to look at all the facts and to hold Josh Young accountable for the murder of Trey Zwimmer. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go back and deliberate. The first thing we have to do is to select the alternate juror. If I can have the attorneys up here, please.